almost one-fourth of our social entrepreneurs were working with children or young people. Education, when we even talk about education, there are so many different layers to it. There is teaching, there is student engagement, there is the way classroom is designed, there is the way the whole curriculum is designed.
Today we have with us Mr. Yashveer Singh, who is the co-founder of Ashoka Young Changemakers. Mr. Yashveer has worked with international development organizations on strategy and sustainability and has been instrumental in launching and setting up new projects, prior to which he founded a youth non-profit to address the talent inequity in the development sector and influence youth culture in India by inspiring, educating, and supporting university students to pursue social innovation and entrepreneurship. For this work, Mr. Yashveer has been recognized as one of the social entrepreneurs in Forbes 30 Under 30 Asia 2016 list and has also been awarded prestigious Youth Action Net 2012 Fellowship as one of the 20 young social entrepreneurs representing 16 different countries by International Youth Foundation and was recognized as Global Shaper 2011 by World Economic Forum. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Yashveer.
Thank you, Deepak. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Indeed. And so we've heard a lot about Ashoka and how it's been reshaping the whole culture of social innovation and social entrepreneurship as such. So could you just elaborate on how you having founded the Ashoka Young Changemakers program to bring together the 40 years worth of that network of Ashoka to help learn from the best practices and then take the interventions to a next level? So how would you say the same network of peer learners is being leveraged to kind of create a base for all the social entrepreneurs to come together?
Sure. Thank you, Deepak. So firstly, my thanks to CSR Box for organizing this series. I think our ecosystem really needs something like this where knowledge could be captured and brought together. So my congratulations on that. Very quickly about Ashoka. So Ashoka is one of the largest networks of social entrepreneurs. Our founder, Mr. Bill Drayton, started the organization way back in 1980, which is exactly 40 years back. And his mission at that point in time was, how do we search, select, and work with some of the leading social entrepreneurs of our times? And from the last 40 years, Ashoka has been finding these social entrepreneurs and recognizing them as Ashoka Fellows and supporting through the Ashoka Fellowship Program and working very closely with them. So while working with these social entrepreneurs, what we observed was a large proportion of these social entrepreneurs were also tackling issues related to education. And that definitely was a big insight that almost one-fourth of our social entrepreneurs were working with children or young people. And what we observed is a couple of things. One, we found that all our social entrepreneurs or most of our social entrepreneurs started very young. And what that meant was that they all were being change makers very early on in life. So they were launching their initiative at 16, 17, 18 years old. Sometimes they will continue the same initiative. Sometimes it will evolve or something new will emerge out of it. And that was a very powerful insight that most of our social entrepreneurs were starting young. Second bit is what we learned is most of our social entrepreneurs who are working in the space of education or young people were putting young people in charge. And what that meant was they were really listening to young voices. They were really putting them at the center and they wanted to engage them in the entire education process. Now, what it did to us is, so Ashoka, because we were one of the pioneers in the field of social entrepreneurship, and we were able to make social entrepreneurship a mainstream sector or get the identity or recognition it has today, was because we celebrated and we built this community of Ashoka Fellows. So on the similar lines, what we felt is if we also need to make every young person as a change maker, then we need to have a community of young people who themselves are change maker and who truly and strongly believe in sharing that change making ability and power with other young people. And that's how the conceptualization of young Ashoka Young Changemakers program happened 2 years back in 2018. We are currently present in 5 countries, and a couple of countries are in the lineup. But for us is through these young people, how do we influence the way they are being educated, the way the larger ecosystem can learn that we live in this historic moment, and in this moment we need to really grow our young people in a different way, in a different manner. So that's what we do with our Ashoka Young Changemakers program.
Amazing. And it's just like wonderful how you're just like trying to change and create change makers through those young people. So like you mentioned that these young students that are a part of these programs, be it the fellowship or Ashoka Young Changemakers, a lot of those focus on the domain of education per se to create new interventions in the space. But we have seen that in this space, a lot of different approaches that these young people come up with, but the thing is, they are not sustainable in the long run. So, do you believe that these individualistic ideas that they're coming up with would be better, or should all of those try to focus on more of a holistic approach, and then probably branch out into specific domains in education to further improve it in the future?
Right. Very interesting question. Thanks for asking that, Deepak. So one of the my response is going to be that when we started Ashoka, we also believe that if we find and build this community of social entrepreneurs as through Ashoka Fellowship, they will all be able to scale their idea. They will all be able to change systems around the problems which are existing, and there'll be a day where none of the problems would exist, which we all want to be removed from the system. But one of the things which we all have seen and learned is that because the rate of change around us has accelerated so fast in last 30-40 years, so it's not just about one problem and addressing it. With this changing time, even the landscape of the kind of challenges our society faces also changes. So first piece of my response would be, if there is a change maker or a social entrepreneur who starts with one challenge, and if they work and really make difference in that one aspect, it might happen, and during that duration there might be 2 or 3 more challenges which would have come, just because the world is changing around us, the society is organizing and reorganizing. So that's one bit which we need to keep in mind in the context of why some of the initiatives do not appear to be making as much impact. But what we have seen is they have had tremendous impact on societies and some of the problems which had existed. The second bit which you talk about is, of course, there's a huge need around collaboration and bringing these approaches. And that's what this era of COVID also has taught us, that it is not just about one solution creating all the difference in the world. Because education, when we even talk about education, there are so many different layers to it. There is teaching, there is student engagement, there is the way classroom is designed, there is the way the whole curriculum is designed. So it can't be one approach fixing it all. So it also has to be all the approaches coming together and then working. Because what it also does is then, along with the changing dynamics, the ability of all of them to change together also increases. And this is the precise reason that when Ashoka started, we felt that our mission is to find and support these social entrepreneurs. But now in last a decade or so, what we have realized is it is not enough to depend on just few inspirational leaders. Those are important and those are making huge difference. But what will really help us achieve what we all want to achieve is when everyone becomes a change maker, right? So that has been the translation of even our mission of just finding social entrepreneurs to now working with those social entrepreneurs to create a world where everyone is a change maker. Because once someone has that power, or when everyone has that power, then everyone has that ability to adapt and also master the change around them. And that's how everyone will be able to be a problem solver. And that's where I feel our education system needs to now move, so that everyone can have that agency and that power to create and adapt to change.
Sure. And you just mentioned 2 aspects here. So one was the approach that these individual change makers per se are trying to, build up on. And the second one that keeps on repeating and then keeps on coming up is that everyone can be a change maker. So do you think both of these can be brought into or mimicked in the current education system? So like the way you approach the whole change making with youth is that you try to create more change makers to then further the idea of change making amongst the youth in a particular criteria or a disruption or a problem that they might be working towards. But the same can be mimicked into education system per se for a young student to inculcate all those nuances of change making or thinking that in that kind of a direction. So do you think that sort of a thing is possible, and how can we probably go about it to create actually those change makers as a culture?
Right. So one initial bit I would like to address is, Deepak, we have to see that being a change maker has to be a way of growing up.
Yeah.
So being a change maker shouldn't be seen in a isolation, because sometimes what we tend to do is we say that there is a education vertical and then you have to be a change maker. So when Ashoka talks about being a change maker, it is so one is, of course, there's this larger debate which is about what is education, right? And education is more about preparing you for life, preparing a child and young person to be able to thrive in this world. And that can only happen if being able to become a change maker is also a way of education. So one of the unfortunate things which has happened is, I think in last few decades, our education has become very much centric on learning information and gathering a lot of information,
Yeah.
which, because I was talking about the changing world, information is available. I think most of the people who have access to some sort of device can find it online, Google it, Wikipedia, and there are so many platforms. So what one should be really doing is that now education needs to reimagine itself, that for this fast changing world, what would be the definition of education for a young person? And when you ask that question, then it addresses the aspect that being a change maker is not seen in isolation. Then a parent doesn't say, oh, don't waste time on this, focus on your academics, right? Because this then is seen as relevant as you being able to learn that information or whatever other concepts you want to teach your child. So that would be my first bit around around seeing it in a different light and being able to prepare our children around that. The second aspect of your question is that when we say every young person is change maker, what we are saying is that every young person needs to have that agency to be able to come out with ideas, to be able to form a team around those ideas, and to achieve some sort of impact. Now, it's as basic as that. Now, today, I think, unfortunately, by and large, the education system doesn't encourage ideas, right? Even to the extent, there are a lot of, I think, educationists who talk about young people being change makers, confuse it with young people being volunteers. That's not the space Ashoka comes from. Our idea is that young people need, if they see a gap, they need to be encouraged that what can you do about it,
Yeah.
right? And when you ask that question, you will come out with lot of ideas, and then someone needs to guide you, someone needs to nurture those ideas, so then it becomes your second nature, and that's how you educate your child. So what I'll just conclude my response by saying is, when people talk about young people being at the center, this means not in a symbolic way, but it has to happen where their ideas need to be encouraged. For instance, growing up, all the while we learnt all the formulas in chemistry and concepts of physics, I don't think anyone encouraged me to think about how would it apply in your life, or how would this formula make sense in your life. I think we need to have that kind of attitude being developed, and that kind of ideas being welcome, and that will see a different kind of literacy for our young people. So my final comment would be, Deepak, even the definition of literacy keeps changing. 300 years back, it was, can you read, write? 30 years back, can you learn, or are you comfortable learning technology, computers, so on and so forth? Today, I feel the definition of being educated or literate has to be that, can you work in a changing environment? Are you able to come ideas, and are you able to thrive in a changing environment? And that's what is required for our young people and all the ecosystem around our young people to reimagine and reconsider.
Perfect. Perfect. So that's one way of summing it up, and it's just like so perfectly like put together there. So you just mentioned about the education policy per se. So right now the same has undergone a massive change in years, I would say, and has been changed so much so that people are questioning the feasibility of it over the years that might come up. Like how would it actually turn out to be? Because the changes are too strong, or in a way just redefining the whole purpose of education there. So do you think that the changes that have been introduced are reasonable and can see the outcomes that they have been set out for, or is it something of an over achieving objective that just might as well just go for a miss? And the second part of the question would be that how do these changes affect the fellows that have been working in the space of education? Because again, these people have been working with a simple mindset of how the education policy was, and now since the whole change has happened from the basic level to the whole education stream, so how would that affect the fellows programs that are still ongoing?
Right. So, firstly, let me touch the fellows piece. So, one thing fellows really base their work on is to achieve larger social good, because
Yeah.
that's what they care about. And I do not see there will be a problem for them to really quickly translating around what can be done now, because there's a new education policy. So, that's not a challenge which I see, because these social entrepreneurs are innovators. They are very agile, and they want to change things where they feel that the need is the most. And some of the fellows, I feel, is what is being advocated in the education policy. They have been advocating it from last couple of decades.
Yeah.
So it's a welcome step in that sense, that some of their inputs have been factored in. Having said that, what I have observed about the education policy is, I like the fact that it gives a lot of flexibility to young people. It really puts young people at the center, and very early on. So in Ashoka, what we say is that young people need to start mastering empathy as young as 5 years old, from the age of 5 to 12. And I see a lot of stress on early childhood education around the emotional and growth of mindset of a child at that age. So that's definitely welcome. The second bit is, it also gives you more flexibility around what you want to really pursue in your life, right? And explore more interest. And if you take a pause also, it makes it more easier for you to come back and really again be part of the normal education system. So certainly those are some of the changes. I feel like we are actually late. It should have happened maybe in the early 2000s. I think we are playing the catching up game in terms of innovating on education. Now, the biggest challenge which I see is that the intent of the policy seems more young people friendly and children friendly. But how are we going to execute? So we have almost around 100 million young people currently going into schools. And what it will require is, it will require a massive mindset shift in people who are running those schools, teachers who are teaching in those schools, right? And more than the young people, it is tough for adults to unlearn.
Yeah.
So the biggest challenge, which I feel, which is a typical policy challenge in a country like India, where we are talking about at least 100 million young people being affected by this new education policy, which is bigger than many countries' overall population, right? How are you going to execute, and execute not in terms of word, but in terms of spirit, and making sure that what is in the intent of this policy reaches to every child? And for that, you need to have a lot of infrastructure being created, because we are imagining a new way. You need to really prepare your human resource teachers and teacher training institutes, and all those, some of the practices which have been existent in the education system. And to change that mindset, I'm going to I'm not sure how quickly can we do. And that's where again I see a huge opportunity, Deepak, for these social entrepreneurs and government to work together. So my request would be for a government to really invite these social entrepreneurs, that this is what we want to achieve, right? This is what is the new education policy. How do you suggest what sort of systems and practices we need to keep in place, so that we see next couple of years some trickling down impact of these this new education policy. So that's where I thought I think that this is a welcome step, a little late though, but it's always good at least that some change is happening. But how prepared are we for implementing it is something which I still think, and that's where we need social entrepreneurs to come together and work with government in effectively handling it.
And just to sum the whole conversation up and just like to come to a conclusion there. So what would be some of these changes? Like you mentioned that one is infrastructure, one would be execution of the whole policy. So where do you see this merger of individuals and the institutions, be it the government ones or the other educational institutions coming together, can happen where individuals can empower these human resources like the teachers or the students or any other people associated with the whole domain to create an environment that is furthering education, the way it also serves a purpose where it makes it come in line with what the industry also expects. Because right now, like you mentioned, that this is also an experiment that should have probably happened in the early 2000s. So for us to be knowing what would happen, how would the students come out, and right now when it is happening right now, so we still can just imagine what the changes would be and how the students would be. So how do you see the role of individuals per se, and how do you see these change makers from Ashoka playing a role in empowering the institutions and the manpower that's there, the teachers or the students there?
Sure. So a couple of steps there. So one, what I feel is that whatever is written in this education policy, some social entrepreneur or social innovator has already figured out an approach and way of how to do it well, right? So the first step I would do is that I have laid down some of the objectives, and I will really invite all the social innovators and entrepreneurs for effective ideas on how can this be done at a scale, right? And as I was talking about, we need teachers to be educated, we need infrastructure to be reimagined, we need our classrooms to be redesigned. So I'm sure some of the social entrepreneurs and innovators, if you talk to them individually, they have already figured out or they were already experimenting. So this is not new for them. So one is the ability for government or our larger education system to quickly learn from the best practices rather than reimagining it completely and starting from scratch. So that will speed up the process. The second bit is a lot of buy-in required at a mindset shift level. So I think when we started this conversation, you shared that some of the stakeholders in the education system might feel like that is it too radical, right? Because that's what their mindset has been fixed in a way over the years, and that's equally true even for parents. It is very easy for a parent to measure someone that how much are you scoring on 10th grade or 12th grade and behave with their child accordingly. But now it's education is becoming all about being a lifelong learner. That's a different kind of mindset, and our larger society needs to start appreciating it. And that will not happen very quickly, because in any sort of social change, mindset shift is one of the toughest to achieve, because it requires you to be able to unlearn and then learn something. But that will require a lot of consultative talks. That will require celebrating the role models who are doing, very clearly communicating how they are benefiting, right? So one of the questions which I keep getting asked from parents when I interact with them, Deepak, is that if we encourage our young person to be a change maker, how is it going to help our child to get that job? And someone needs to show them with data and statistics to help them understand that the job market is no more the same. We are talking about in the next few years, 80% of the jobs for which we are preparing our young people will be gone. So when you give the startling static to them, then they really become more open and they feel that this is important for them. No parent wants to say no to anything which is not in the interest of their child, right? Everyone wants to encourage that bit. Just we need to communicate that, celebrate those cases, celebrate those schools, those educational approaches, and so on and so forth. So first is, of course, inviting the idea. Second is celebrating, role modeling, and bringing the mindset shift. And third, which is a overused suggestion, is about collaboration, which we were talking in the beginning of this conversation, is no one approach will fix the entire education system. How you train a teacher has to be in tandem with what is the curriculum being provided to a teacher, because they will go with that, or the guidance around that curriculum. Now those two things need to come together. So my third point after these two steps would be that all these individual approaches which you think are innovative, are able to achieve the objectives laid by new education policy, someone needs to weave them together. Someone needs to bring them together so it can address the whole rather than one aspect of the entire education system. So those are some of the initial thoughts, but again, it's a larger point you asked, Deepak. We can talk hours on this, but maybe for this conversation, these are the 3 points which I think could be useful for the larger educational sector, and for all of us to reimagine the framework.
Perfect. And that brings us to the close of the conversation. It was really insightful hearing from you, Mr. Yashveer, about like how you creating change makers and you're embedding the culture into the education right away from the beginning, and how that idea of change makers being inculcated in the students from an early age can also create the changes that we actually aspire for. And then again, more. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Yashveer.
Thank you, Deepak. Let's all come together to create every young person as a change maker world, and I think then that world will be very beautiful and very collaborative. So thank you so much for having me.